My name is Bridget Taylor. I am 32 years old, and I audit corporate fraud for a living. You would think that spending my days unearthing hidden liabilities and dismantling shell companies would prepare me for anything. But nothing prepares you for the moment you realize your own family is running a hostile extraction on your life. Until last winter, I believed my family was just difficult. I did not realize I was simply the designated bank account for their Delaware dynasty. I was sitting at the long mahogany dining table in my parents' estate. 27 relatives were in the room. The air smelled of roasted duck and expensive gin. Then my grandfather Winston tapped the side of his crystal champagne flute with a silver butter knife. The ping echoed off the vaulted ceilings. He stood up and smoothed the lapels of his custom suit. He did not smile. He looked right at me. "Family is a ledger of shared burdens and shared triumphs," he said. "Julian requires $50,000 for his VIP package to the World Cup. You will fund it." I let out a short breath that sounded like a laugh because I thought he was testing my sense of humor. Nobody else laughed. My cousins stared at their plates. My aunts refused to make eye contact. Winston placed his knuckles on the wood and leaned forward. "Every person at this table agrees," he said. "You owe the family this much money." The room went silent. It was a thick and heavy silence, the kind of silence where people wait to see if you will break. And right before I tell you how my mother leaned in to deliver her threat and what I did next, tell me your age, what time it is for you right now, and where you are watching from. Welcome to Edana Told Stories. I really want to know how far this story will travel. I did not answer Winston right away. I sat there, watching a single drop of condensation slide down the side of my water glass. It hit the polished mahogany with a soft splash. That tiny droplet felt like the loudest thing in the room. I looked across the table at Julian. He was swirling a glass of Merlot. He wore the relaxed expression of a man who had never paid his own way. He expected me to write the check. They all did. Then my mother leaned closer. Her name is Beatrice. She smelled of juniper and heavy floral perfume. Around her neck rested the vintage diamond choker that belonged to my late grandmother. It was a piece of jewelry my grandmother had explicitly promised to me, only for Beatrice to casually claim it the day after the funeral. I watched the diamonds catch the light from the chandelier as she lowered her voice. "Do not make a scene, Bridget," she whispered. Her tone was coated in a forced sweetness that made my stomach turn. "You write the check by Tuesday or you are no longer welcome in this house. You are cut off. You lose us forever." But as she delivered the ultimatum, her eyes darted across the table toward Julian. For a fraction of a second, her perfect mask slipped. I caught a flash of raw, unvarnished resentment in her stare. It was a strange contradiction. She was demanding I pay for his lavish lifestyle, yet she looked at him with a hidden, bitter anger. I filed that look away in my mind. At the time, I did not understand what it meant. I did not know the bloodline secret they were hiding. I only knew that the math in front of me did not make sense. $50,000 for soccer tickets. While I worked 60-hour weeks analyzing financial risk, Julian jumped from one failed startup to another, always cushioned by the family name. I scanned the faces of my aunts and uncles. Some looked guilty. Most just looked relieved that Winston had not asked them for the money. This was not a request for a holiday loan. It was an eviction notice, wrapped in an invoice. My grandmother had warned me once when I was 12 years old. I remember sitting on her porch as she told me they would drain me until I was hollow. "Never let them see your ledger," she had whispered. That warning was the reason I became an auditor. That warning was the reason I kept my savings accounts quiet. I reached for my linen napkin. My hands were steady. I folded the fabric into a neat square and set it beside my dinner plate. I looked at Winston, the patriarch of our family, the man who thought fear was the same thing as respect. "No," I said. My voice was calm. It did not shake. It was devoid of the hysteria they were waiting for. Winston tightened his jaw. "Excuse me, I am not paying $50,000 for a vacation," I replied. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped against the hardwood floor. It was a harsh noise that made my aunt wince. "The bank is closed. You walk out that door," Beatrice hissed. Her hand shot out and gripped my wrist. Her manicured nails dug into my skin. "And you are cut off. You hear me?" I looked down at her fingers on my arm. Then I looked at the diamonds glittering at her throat, the diamonds that were supposed to be mine. "Let go," I told her. Her grip faltered. She pulled her hand back as if the silver setting on the table had suddenly caught fire. I stepped away from the chair. I offered no apologies. I did not explain how hard I worked for my money. You do not explain your boundaries to people who profit from your silence. I turned my back on 27 silent relatives. I walked out of the dining room. I grabbed my wool coat from the entryway closet and stepped into the freezing winter night. The heavy oak front door clicked shut behind me. It was a sharp and final sound. I walked down the long driveway toward my car. The gravel crunched under my boots. I thought the worst was over. I thought leaving the table was the end of the extraction. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was freezing. I started the engine and turned the heat on high. I sat there for a moment, watching the breath leave my lungs in small white clouds. I survived the dinner. I drew the line. But as I put the car in drive, my phone lit up in the passenger seat. The screen flashed with an incoming call from Beatrice. I ignored it. 10 seconds later, it flashed again. Winston. I ignored it. Then Julian. Then my aunt. Then an unknown number. The screen stayed illuminated, a relentless beacon in the dark car. They were not letting me walk away. The extortion was not over. It was just changing shape. I pulled out of the estate gates and merged onto the highway leading back to Wilmington. I turned the radio off. I needed the quiet to process what had just happened. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. I kept checking the rearview mirror. Some childish part of me expected a car to follow me, expected someone to care enough to chase me down and apologize. But the road behind me was empty. The only pursuit came through the cellular towers. My phone buzzed again. Then it chimed with a voicemail notification. Then another, and another. The notifications stacked up on the glowing screen like a digital avalanche. It was a coordinated attack. They knew I lived alone. They knew my fiancé Mark was supposed to be out of town. They wanted to fill the silence of my apartment with their voices before I had a chance to realize I was better off without them. By the time I parked in my building garage, my phone felt hot to the touch. The battery was draining, just trying to keep up with the incoming barrage. I sat in the dim light of the parking structure and stared at the screen. 50 missed calls. 70 missed calls. 100. They were trying to break my spirit before the night was over. But they forgot one crucial detail. I make my living looking at numbers. I do not panic when the data piles up. I organize it. And that night, I was about to organize the reality of my family. The drive from the estate to my downtown Wilmington apartment took exactly 42 minutes. I drove under the glowing amber streetlights while my phone vibrated across the passenger seat in a relentless metallic rhythm. It buzzed so frequently that the device grew warm against the leather upholstery. I did not look at the screen. I kept my eyes fixed on the empty lanes ahead. The heater blew warm air over my freezing hands, but I could still feel the cold from the dining room deep inside my bones. When I finally pulled into the concrete parking garage beneath my building, the heavy silence of the underground structure pressed against the windows. The only sound was the low hum of my engine and the unending vibration of the phone. I turned the ignition off. I picked up the device and looked at the glowing notifications. It was 12 minutes past midnight. The screen displayed exactly 200 missed calls. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor. The steel doors slid open to a quiet, carpeted hallway. I unlocked my door and stepped into my apartment. It was a space I had designed to be the opposite of my parents' sprawling estate. There was no mahogany furniture or crystal chandeliers. My home smelled of clean linen and cedar. It was orderly and predictable. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door and let my wool coat fall onto the entryway bench. The silence of the empty rooms should have felt lonely, but to me, it felt like a fortress. I walked into the dark living room and sat down on the edge of the sofa. The city lights of Wilmington filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, pale shadows across the hardwood floor. I set the phone on the coffee table. The screen illuminated the darkness again. 100 new voice messages. They were filling the digital space because they could no longer control the physical space. I took a slow breath and pressed the speaker button. I needed to hear their tactics. I needed to understand the shape of the attack. The first message belonged to Beatrice. A sharp intake of breath crackled through the tiny speaker, followed by a high-pitched sob. It was a sound designed to trigger a daughter's protective instinct. "Bridget, you are breaking my heart," her voice trembled. "How can you be so selfish? Your grandfather is furious, and Julian is devastated. You are destroying this family over a petty grudge. Call me back immediately and apologize. You need to fix this." I listened to the recording twice. I did not focus on the tears. I focused on the cadence. The sob arrived exactly on cue. The phrasing shifted the blame entirely onto my shoulders. It was a calculated performance. I deleted the message and played the next one. This one was Winston. There was no crying. There was no emotional appeal. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble echoing the authority of a boardroom dictator. "Bridget, you have lost your senses," he stated. "You do not walk away from this table. You have until Tuesday morning to rectify this disrespect. If you fail to transfer the funds, the consequences for your future will be permanent. Do not test my resolve." His message was a corporate mandate. He spoke to me the same way he spoke to a failing subsidiary company. He did not ask if I was safe. He did not ask if I had made it home. He only cared about the compliance of his asset. As I sat there in the dark, listening to the audio static, a memory washed over me. It was a brief and vivid recollection from when I was 12 years old. I was sitting on the back porch of my grandmother's summer cottage. She was an observant woman who saw the rot hiding beneath my parents' polished exterior. I remembered the scent of her lavender soap and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She had reached out and placed her frail hand over my workbook. "They will drain you until you are hollow, Bridget," she whispered. Her eyes were sharp and urgent. "Never let them see your ledger. Keep your numbers quiet." That warning had been the defining moment of my childhood. It was the reason I poured my energy into mathematics and finance. It was the reason I became an auditor. I learned early that numbers do not lie. Numbers do not fake tears or issue empty ultimatums. Numbers reveal the truth of a transaction. I looked down at the glowing phone. The emotional barrage was designed to drown me in guilt. They expected me to crumble. They expected me to call back crying and beg for their forgiveness while offering my credit card. I felt the familiar weight of obligation pressing against my chest. But then, the auditor inside me woke up. I stood up and walked into my home office. I turned on the small desk lamp. The warm light pushed back the darkness. I opened my laptop and waited for the screen to brighten. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I opened a new blank spreadsheet. I titled the document, Family Audit. I began to listen to the remaining 98 voicemails. I did not absorb the insults. I processed the data. I set up 4 columns: caller, timestamp, emotional tactic, core demand. I typed with a steady rhythm. Beatrice, leaving a message at 12:15 saying she was having chest pains, went into the spreadsheet as health manipulation to force immediate contact. Julian, leaving a message at 12:30, sighing heavily and saying he guessed he would just cancel his dreams, went into the spreadsheet as victim framing to extract guilt. Winston, leaving a final message at 1 in the morning, reminding me who paid for my childhood braces, went into the spreadsheet as historical debt leveraging. I worked for 2 hours. I transcribed every single message. I stripped away their tears and their anger. I removed the emotional manipulation and laid bare the cold transactions hiding underneath. The spreadsheet grew row by row, revealing a pattern of systemic control. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair and looked at the screen. The fear was gone. The guilt had evaporated. Translating their abuse into sterile data had severed the emotional strings they used to control me. They did not view me as a daughter or a granddaughter. They viewed me as a financial utility. I closed the laptop, feeling a profound and quiet awakening. I had survived the night. I had taken their worst psychological attack and reduced it to text on a screen. I felt safe. I felt untouchable inside my quiet apartment. I walked into the kitchen to pour a glass of water. Then a heavy knock echoed through the hallway. The sound was sudden and loud. It startled me so badly the glass slipped from my fingers and shattered across the kitchen tile. Water pooled around the sharp fragments. I stared at the door. It was nearly 3 a.m. My building had strict security protocols. Nobody could access the residential floors without a key fob or a guest pass. The knock came again. It was frantic and urgent. I stepped carefully around the broken glass and walked softly toward the entryway. I pressed my eye against the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the hallway, but I recognized the figure instantly. It was my fiancé, Mark. He was supposed to be in Chicago attending a 3-day real estate convention. He was not scheduled to fly back until Thursday. But there he was, standing outside my door. He wore a dark wool suit, but his tie was pulled loose and his collar was unbuttoned. His hair was disheveled. He kept looking over his shoulder toward the elevator banks. He looked like a man who had been running. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The cold air from the corridor rushed into my warm apartment. Mark stepped inside before I could even say a word. He smelled of stale coffee and nervous sweat. He dropped his leather briefcase onto the floor. He did not reach out to hug me. He did not ask how I was doing. He looked at my face and let out a long, trembling breath. "Bridget, we have a massive problem," he said. His voice was shaking. "I just came from your parents' house." The cold from the hallway seemed to settle directly into my veins. Mark had brought the toxicity right across my threshold. My safe haven was breached. Mark stood in my entryway. He looked nothing like the polished commercial real estate broker I had agreed to marry. The knot of his navy silk tie hung loose around his neck. His breathing sounded shallow and uneven. He dropped his leather weekender bag onto the floor. It hit the hardwood with a dull thud. He was supposed to be halfway across the country, attending a 3-day real estate convention in Chicago. Instead, he was standing in my apartment, smelling of stale airport coffee and the distinct pine scent that always permeated my parents' estate. I took a step back. I did not ask why he missed his flight. I looked at the dark circles under his eyes and waited for the truth. "Bridget, we have a problem," Mark said. He ran a hand through his hair. "I went to the estate this afternoon. I thought I could talk to your grandfather. I thought I could smooth things over before the dinner party began." My chest tightened. The air in the hallway suddenly felt thin. "You went to see Winston behind my back?" He held up his hands like he was trying to calm a startled animal. "I wanted to protect you. You know how he gets when people defy him. He was threatening to freeze our wedding venue deposit. He said he would call the vendors and ruin our reputation in the city. I had to buy us some time." "Time for what?" I asked. My voice remained flat. Mark swallowed hard. His gaze shifted toward the floor. "I told him we would give them a down payment, $10,000, just to secure the World Cup package and keep Julian quiet. It gets them off our back until we figure out a long-term plan." I stared at him. "We do not have $10,000 in our checking account." He winced. "I know. But we have the high-yield escrow account, the one we set up for the house down payment. That account requires 2 signatures to initiate a withdrawal," I reminded him. My hands were turning cold. "I know," Mark repeated. He finally looked up. His eyes were desperate. "I told Winston I would get your signature by tomorrow morning. Bridget, it is just a fraction of the total demand. It is the cost of peace. It keeps us in their good graces. He was asking me to fund my own extortion. He wanted me to sign away our future home to finance a luxury vacation for Julian. But something else bothered me, something much deeper. Winston did not negotiate. Winston did not accept partial payments from people he viewed as subordinates unless there was significant collateral involved. Mark was hiding a variable. I did not yell. I did not throw the ceramic bowl from the entryway table. The auditor inside my head took full control of the room. "Sit down," I told him. Mark blinked. He was surprised by my calm tone. He walked over to the sofa and sank into the cushions. He let out a long sigh of relief, assuming the worst part of the conversation was over. He actually thought I was considering his proposal. I walked into my home office and picked up my secondary tablet. Earlier that year, Mark had linked his personal email to this device so he could print our catering contracts. He never logged out. The screen glowed bright against the dark room. I tapped the mail icon. I did not have to search for long. The top message in his inbox was marked urgent. The sender was Winston Taylor. I opened the email. The subject line read, "Family Holding Company Executive Transition." I read the text. It was a formal corporate offer letter. Winston was offering Mark a vice president role within the Delaware holding enterprise, a 6-figure base salary, generous stock options, a company vehicle. The final sentence of the email burned into my memory. It stated the offer was pending the successful resolution of the travel funds and his seamless integration into the family structure. Mark had not gone to the estate to negotiate peace. He went to negotiate a job. He used my trauma as leverage to secure an executive title. He sold my autonomy for a paycheck. I walked back into the living room holding the tablet. Mark looked up. His hopeful expression faltered when he saw the blue light reflecting in my eyes. I turned the screen toward him. He read the subject line. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You promised him my signature," I said. The words tasted like ash. "You used my savings account as your resume." "Bridget, listen to me," he stammered. He stood up and reached for my arm. I stepped out of his reach. "This is a game-changing opportunity for us, a vice president role. Do you know how long it would take me to earn that title at my current firm? We would be set for life. I did this for our future." "You did this for your ego," I replied. "You let my grandfather purchase your loyalty." He ran his hands over his face. "You are being unreasonable. It is $10,000. We can earn it back in a month with my new salary. You just have to play the game." I looked at the man I had planned to marry. He was a stranger. He was just another version of Winston, dressed in a cheaper suit. He was willing to trade my security for his own comfort. "Pack your things," I said. Mark froze. "What?" I pointed toward the bedroom. "You heard me. Get your overnight bag. Get your coats. You are leaving." "You cannot be serious," he pleaded. His voice rose in panic. "We are getting married in 4 months. The invitations are printed. You are throwing away our entire life over a misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding," I stated. "It is an audit. You failed." I did not wait for him to move. I walked into the bedroom. I pulled his canvas duffel bag from the closet and unzipped it. I grabbed his suits, his shoes, and his toiletries. I threw them into the bag without folding anything. I dragged a heavy duffel down the hallway and dropped it at his feet in the living room. Mark stared at the bag. He realized the negotiation was over. The panic in his eyes morphed into a defensive anger. He picked up the duffel by the leather handles. "You are making a mistake," he warned. "Your grandfather told me you would be stubborn. He said you always burn bridges when you do not get your way. You are going to end up alone." I walked over to the front door and pulled it open. The cold air from the corridor swept in. "Leave the keys," I commanded. Mark tightened his jaw. He reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the silver keyring holding the access fob to my building. He did not hand it to me. He tossed it onto the entryway table. The metal hit the thick glass surface with a sharp, resonant clatter. That sound finalized the end of my safe haven. He stepped out into the hallway. I shut the door and turned the deadbolt. The apartment fell silent again. It was a different kind of quiet now. It was empty. The future I had planned was gone. But I did not have the luxury of grieving. My financial security was compromised. Mark knew the passwords to our joint checking accounts. He knew the routing numbers. I walked back to my home office and sat down at the desk. I opened my laptop and navigated to the banking portal. I changed my login credentials. I unlinked his access from the primary savings accounts. I transferred the remaining balances into a secure individual holding account under my name alone. I moved methodically. My keystrokes were sharp and deliberate. Once the immediate funds were secured, I clicked on the credit monitoring tab. I needed to ensure Mark had not opened any hidden lines of credit during his secret negotiations with Winston. I pulled a comprehensive 10-year credit report. The document generated on the screen as a long digital file. I scrolled past the current auto loans. I scrolled past the student debt I had paid off 3 years ago. I scanned the closed accounts. Then my eyes stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned closer to the monitor. There was a dormant account listed under the real estate holdings section. It was tied directly to my Social Security number. It was a home equity line of credit secured against a property I did not know I owned. I dragged my cursor over the dates. The initial withdrawal was not recent. It happened 8 years ago. $50,000 had been drawn. Then another $40,000 2 years later. Then another. My heart pounded against my ribs. The $10,000 betrayal Mark attempted was a minor infraction compared to what I was looking at. My credit history was a map of hidden withdrawals. Someone had been borrowing against my name for nearly a decade. The financial violation did not start tonight. It had been happening in the shadows for years. I needed to know exactly who signed those papers. The morning sun climbed above the Wilmington skyline, reflecting sharply against the glass facades of the downtown financial district. I had not slept a single minute. The blue light of my laptop monitor was still burning into my retinas. The anomaly on my credit report rested like a physical weight against my ribcage. A $50,000 draw 8 years ago, $40,000 2 years later. Both sums were secured against a property deed I had never signed. I needed concrete answers. I stepped into a cold shower to wash away the exhaustion of the night. I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit and pinned my hair back tightly. I needed to look exactly like the senior auditor I was. Before leaving my apartment, I opened the bottom drawer of my home office desk. My fingers brushed past spare pens and stray paper clips until I found a small brass key. 2 weeks ago, a thick envelope had arrived in my mailbox. The return address belonged to a law firm representing the late executor of my grandmother's estate. The enclosed letter stated the executor had recently passed away. His final instruction was the immediate release of a safe deposit box key upon my 32nd birthday. At the time, I had tossed the key into the drawer, assuming the box held nothing more than old photographs and sentimental trinkets. Now, looking at the heavy brass metal resting in my palm, I knew it was a map. I parked my car outside the central bank branch, right as the heavy glass doors unlocked for business. I bypassed the teller line and walked straight toward the vault manager. I handed her the brass key along with my identification. She checked the signature card and nodded silently. I followed her down a quiet, carpeted hallway into the subterranean vault. The air down there was sterile and climate-controlled. It smelled of polished steel and old paper. The manager navigated the rows of metal compartments until she stopped at box number 412. She inserted her master key, followed by my brass key. The dual locks clicked in unison. She pulled the metal door open, stepped out of the private viewing room, and closed the heavy door behind her, leaving me alone in the dead silence. I pulled the long metal drawer onto the viewing table. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. My hands hovered over the lid. For a fraction of a second, I considered turning around and walking away. Ignorance provides a certain kind of comfort. But comfort was the exact currency my family used to purchase my obedience. I pushed the hesitation aside and lifted the lid. A distinct scent drifted up from the enclosed space. It was the smell of lavender perfume. It was the exact fragrance my grandmother used to wear on quiet Sunday afternoons. The scent hit me hard. It was a ghost reaching out from the past, reminding me of the porch where she told me to guard my ledger. I closed my eyes for a brief moment to steady my breathing. I pushed the sentimentality away and reached into the metal box. Inside sat 3 separate stacks of documents. The first stack consisted of loose bank statements bound by a decaying rubber band. I slid the band off. The rubber snapped and crumbled onto the table. I recognized the letterhead immediately. It was a high-risk offshore financial institution, often used to bypass domestic regulations. I scanned the transaction logs. The name listed on the withdrawal columns was Julian. The dates aligned perfectly with his supposed startup company launches. But the vendor names were not technology incubators or marketing firms. They were offshore casinos, sports betting syndicates, and high-stakes online poker domains. I reviewed the numbers with analytical precision. 5,000 lost on a Tuesday, 12,000 transferred on a Friday night. Wire fees piling up page after page. The math painted a vivid picture of a severe gambling addiction. For a brief moment, I felt a strange sense of logical relief. This was the red herring. The $50,000 World Cup demand was a lie designed to protect his image. They were not buying VIP soccer tickets. They were covering a dangerous gambling debt to keep loan sharks away from the family doorstep. It made Winston look like a desperate patriarch trying to hide a scandal rather than a calculating thief. It was a terrible truth, but it was a truth I could understand. The relief faded rapidly. The auditor inside my head demanded a complete data set. A gambling cover-up explained the current extortion attempt, but it did not explain the home equity line of credit hidden on my 10-year report. I pushed the casino statements aside and reached for the second stack. It was a heavy-bound ledger with handwritten entries. Beneath the ledger lay a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. The label read, "To Bridget upon my passing." I broke the wax seal with my thumb. I pulled out a pristine legal document. It was a trust agreement drafted 15 years ago. I read the clauses line by line. My grandmother had explicitly bypassed Winston and Beatrice. She knew their greed would consume everything she built. The trust transferred a substantial real estate portfolio, including a highly valuable commercial property, directly into my name upon her death. The document appointed a quiet, independent executor to oversee the transition and shield the assets from my parents. I pulled out my phone and cross-referenced the property identification numbers listed in the trust with the anomaly on my credit report. The digits matched. The property securing that mystery equity line belonged to me. The final piece of the puzzle rested in the handwritten ledger. It was a detailed log kept by the late executor outlining his suspicions and discoveries. Following my grandmother's death, Winston and Beatrice had presented a different will to the probate court, a simpler, forged document that granted Beatrice full administrative control over the assets. They had bribed or coerced the necessary signatures to suppress the true trust. But because the original shadow deed already listed my Social Security number, they needed a way to extract the cash without triggering an automatic audit flagged to my name. They had forged my signature to open the home equity line of credit. They drained the value of my inheritance while I was sitting in college classes worrying about buying textbooks and paying rent. They leveraged my property to fund Julian's endless string of failed ventures and his hidden gambling debts. Winston had not just asked for $50,000 at the dinner table. He was performing routine maintenance on his personal cash cow. I stared at the forged signatures documented in the ledger. The World Cup demand was merely the continuation of a decade-long pattern of financial vampirism. They kept me close to monitor my income. They kept me isolated to ensure I never dug into my own financial standing. Every family holiday, every forced dinner, every guilt trip was a calculated strategy to maintain their theft. They had carefully curated my reality so I would never realize I held the keys to the kingdom. I was not a daughter or a granddaughter. I was a host organism. The grief I felt the night before evaporated entirely. The sorrow of losing my family burned away, leaving nothing but cold, calculated rage. My heart rate slowed down. My vision narrowed. My movements became sharp and precise. They thought my silence at the dinner table was a sign of weakness. They thought pushing Mark to betray me would force my surrender. They had no idea they had just handed a loaded weapon to a senior financial investigator. I gathered the trust, the handwritten ledger, and the offshore casino statements. I slid them carefully into my leather briefcase. The brass locks clicked shut with a sharp, satisfying sound. I walked out of the vault, leaving the empty metal box behind. I handed the master key back to the manager and stepped out into the bright morning sunlight. The crisp winter air filled my lungs. I felt powerful. I possessed the paper trail. I possessed the evidence to dismantle the Delaware dynasty, brick by brick. I walked toward my car parked on the busy downtown street. I planned to drive straight to a corporate litigator. I was already outlining the sequence of legal strikes in my head. I mapped out the civil fraud charges, the estate reclamation, and the criminal referrals. But as I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was not another voicemail from Beatrice. It was not a threatening text from Winston. The screen displayed a high-priority alert from my corporate office security desk. The message was urgent. Ms. Taylor, we require your immediate presence in the main lobby. An individual claiming to be your brother has bypassed the front reception desk and is causing a severe disturbance. Please advise. I tightened my grip on the leather handle of my briefcase. Julian was not hiding in the shadows of the estate. He was bringing the extortion directly into my professional domain. I navigated the morning traffic with singular focus. The leather briefcase resting on the passenger seat felt heavier than usual. It contained the true trust documents, the forged signatures, and the offshore casino logs. I parked in the subterranean garage of my corporate office building. The concrete walls echoed with the sound of luxury sedans rolling over the polished floor. I rode the private elevator up to the ground-level plaza. My financial consulting firm occupied the top 10 floors of a towering glass structure in the heart of the business district. The main lobby was an expansive cavern built of white marble and brushed steel. It was a space designed to intimidate newcomers and project unyielding authority. The air smelled of expensive espresso and crisp winter coats. It was a sanctuary where logic ruled and emotions were kept strictly in check. I walked past the indoor water feature toward the security turnstiles. I held my corporate identification badge in my hand, ready to scan the magnetic reader. Then a voice shattered the quiet elegance of the morning rush. Bridget. The sound bounced off the marble walls. The tone was sharp and demanding. I stopped walking. I turned around and saw Julian standing near the reception desk. He looked entirely out of place in this environment. Surrounded by executives in tailored dark suits and muted ties, he wore a light cashmere sweater and distressed designer denim. His hair was perfectly styled to look effortlessly messy. He carried the posture of a wealthy heir who believed the rules did not apply to him. The receptionist behind the desk looked panicked, her hand hovering over the telephone. Julian had bypassed the visitor protocol, refusing to sign the guest registry. He marched across the open floor directly toward me. His face was twisted into an exaggerated mask of agony. He was playing the role of the distressed sibling, and he wanted an audience. "How could you do this to us?" he demanded. His voice was far too loud for the setting. It was theatrical and piercing. "Mom is sick with worry. She could barely get out of bed this morning because of your selfish behavior." People stopped walking. The hushed conversations about market trends and quarterly projections ceased. Senior partners holding leather portfolios paused mid-step. Junior analysts glanced over the rims of their coffee cups from the ground floor cafe. Julian thrived on attention, and he was using the crowd to build his stage. He wanted to drag the toxicity of the estate dining room directly into my professional sanctuary. He stepped closer, invading my personal space to ensure the executives nearby heard every single word. "You write the check today," he hissed, dropping his volume just enough to sound desperate, but keeping it loud enough to carry across the marble floor. $50,000 is pocket change for you. You are going to let our family fall apart over a petty grudge. You owe us this money, Bridget. Stop acting like a victim and do your job. He was weaponizing shame. He expected me to flush with embarrassment. He expected me to panic at the sight of my colleagues staring. In his mind, I would pull him into a private conference room and negotiate a quick payout just to make the public spectacle disappear. He thought the threat of professional humiliation would force my hand. I felt the adrenaline flood my veins. The urge to scream the truth about his secret gambling debts burned in my throat. I wanted to tell the entire lobby about the forged estate documents sitting in my briefcase. I wanted to expose him as a fraud. But I knew the unwritten rules of the corporate world better than he did. The person who loses their temper loses their credibility. The person who raises their voice first is the one who looks unstable. I looked down at my charcoal blazer. A small crease had formed near the left lapel. I reached up and pinched the fine wool fabric between my thumb and index finger. I smoothed the crease down, pulling the material taut against my chest. The simple, physical motion grounded me. It anchored my focus and slowed my racing heart. I let go of the blazer and looked Julian directly in the eyes. I gave him nothing. No anger, no tears, no negotiation. I turned my head toward the main security desk. The head of building security, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Marcus, was already approaching with 2 uniformed guards flanking him. "Marcus," I said. My tone was flat, even, and devoid of any familial warmth. "This individual does not have an appointment. He is not a client. He is trespassing on private property." Julian blinked. The theatrical sadness vanished from his face, replaced by genuine confusion. He stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "What are you doing?" he stammered, taking a half step back. "I am your brother. We are family." I kept my eyes fixed on the security team. "Please escort him off the premises immediately. Furthermore, I need an official incident report filed with the Property Management Office. Document the unauthorized entry, the verbal harassment, and the disruption of business operations. I want a stamped copy sent to my legal counsel by noon today." Julian realized the emotional manipulation was failing. The public stage he tried to build was collapsing into a sterile corporate procedure. He was being treated like a vagrant. Marcus placed a firm hand on Julian's shoulder. "Sir, you need to leave the building right now," the guard instructed. The physical contact shattered Julian's facade. The golden boy of the Delaware dynasty was not accustomed to being handled. He shoved the guard's hand away. His face turned a dark, mottled red. "Do not touch me," he snarled. The 2 backup guards moved in instantly. They flanked him, grabbing his arms and forcing him backward toward the revolving glass doors. As they pushed him out of the lobby, Julian lost whatever control he had left. The polished air disappeared, leaving behind a desperate, cornered extortionist. "You think you can hide here?" he screamed over his shoulder. The venom in his voice echoed through the cavernous space, causing a few receptionists to flinch. "You think a security badge protects you? We will tear your life apart. You are finished, Bridget." The revolving doors spun, pushing him out into the freezing morning air. The heavy glass sealed the lobby off from his shouting. The room fell silent once more. The quiet was heavy and uncomfortable. My colleagues averted their eyes, pretending they had not just witnessed a blatant shakedown. I offered no explanations to the onlookers. I did not smile, and I did not apologize. I simply scanned my badge at the turnstile and stepped into the waiting elevator. The steel doors slid shut, cutting me off from the whispers. As the car ascended to the 40th floor, the iron facade I had maintained finally cracked. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. The adrenaline was leaving my system, leaving behind a cold, physiological tremor. I walked down the carpeted hallway, ignoring the greetings of my passing coworkers. I entered my private office and closed the heavy oak door. I set my briefcase on the desk and gripped the edge of the mahogany table. I focused on my breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold. Exhale for 4 seconds. The physical threat was gone, but the psychological warfare was escalating rapidly. Julian had failed to secure the funds through intimidation. He had failed to shame me into submission. That meant the family would pivot to a new strategy. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a follow-up notification from the security desk regarding the incident report. Instead, the screen displayed a text message from Aunt Valerie. Valerie was a sharp, observant African-American woman who understood the toxic undercurrents of the Taylor family better than anyone. She maintained a polite distance from Winston's control, choosing to watch the dysfunction from the perimeter. She rarely intervened in the drama, but her text was urgent and direct. Bridget, check your social media accounts immediately. Julian just called Beatrice from the street outside your office building. They are furious that you threw him out. Your mother just posted a long manifesto online. They are tagging your firm and your professional network. Get ready. I unlocked my phone and opened my browser. The physical ambush had failed, so they were shifting to a digital assault. They were determined to burn my career to the ground. I unlocked my phone and opened the browser. My thumbs hovered over the glass screen. The digital assault was already underway. Beatrice possessed a unique talent for public relations. She knew exactly how to craft a narrative that painted her as a selfless martyr while ensuring I looked like an ungrateful monster. I navigated to her profile page and found the post. The text stretched across the screen, accompanied by a recent photograph of Winston, looking tired and frail. He was never frail. He played 18 holes of golf every Saturday morning and fired contractors for minor infractions. But the lighting in the picture was dim, casting hollow shadows beneath his cheekbones. The caption read like a calculated tragedy. It breaks a mother's heart when the child she nurtured turns her back during our darkest hour. We spent decades sacrificing our own comfort to ensure her success. Now she refuses to assist us in a time of severe medical and financial distress. I never thought I would experience elder abuse from my own flesh and blood. Below the text, the comments section resembled a digital firing squad. Extended relatives who had ignored my existence for years suddenly transformed into fierce defenders of the estate. Cousin Greg wrote a scathing paragraph questioning my morality. Aunt Diane posted a link to my corporate biography page. Julian, operating under a pseudonymous account, took the strategy a step further. He tagged the official social media handle of my financial consulting firm. He asked the public if the partners knew they employed a senior auditor who financially exploited her aging grandparents. My stomach twisted into a tight, cold knot. The physical confrontation in the lobby was a reckless blunder on his part, but this online maneuver was a genuine strategic threat. In my industry, reputation functioned as currency. If a wealthy client searched my name and found accusations of elder financial abuse, my career would suffer immediate damage. Human resources departments did not care about the nuanced truth of family dynamics. They cared about liability and brand protection. I watched the share count on the post climb from 20 to 50 within minutes. I needed an exit strategy. I could not sit in my glass-walled office waiting for the human resources director to summon me. I grabbed my wool coat and my leather briefcase. I texted Valerie back, proposing a quiet coffee shop 3 miles outside the downtown perimeter. She agreed instantly. The drive gave me time to compose my thoughts. The cafe was a small, independent roastery tucked away in a quiet residential neighborhood far from the corporate district. It smelled of dark roast beans and damp raincoats. The lunch rush had faded, leaving the space mostly empty. I spotted Valerie sitting in a quiet corner booth. She wore a tailored camel trench coat and thin gold hoop earrings. She radiated a formidable calm. Valerie was my father's sister, but she carried none of his cowardice. She watched the family dynamics from a safe distance, refusing to participate in Winston's power games. I slid into the booth across from her. I placed my heavy briefcase on the seat next to me, keeping a protective hand on the leather strap. Valerie did not offer empty platitudes. She did not ask how I was feeling. She simply slid a porcelain mug of dark roast across the laminated table toward me. Valerie picked up a small wooden stirrer. She stirred her own black coffee with slow, deliberate, circular motions. Her smartphone rested on the table between us. The screen lit up, illuminating a text notification from Winston. Then, an incoming call from Beatrice followed. The device vibrated against the wood, producing a low humming noise. Valerie kept her eyes locked on me. She ignored the glowing screen entirely, refusing to acknowledge their demands. "They are organizing a firing squad," Valerie said. Her voice was smooth and precise. "Winston is furious about the lobby incident. He feels he lost control of the narrative, so he activated the network." I pulled my phone out to show her the post. "I know. They are tagging my firm. They are trying to ruin my livelihood." Valerie stopped stirring. She placed the wooden stick on a paper napkin. "It goes deeper than public shaming, Bridget. Winston called an emergency meeting of the trust beneficiaries this morning. He issued an ultimatum. Anyone who does not publicly denounce you on that thread will have their quarterly stipends frozen. He is weaponizing the inheritance to force compliance. The outrage you are reading online is not loyalty. It is a hostage situation." I stared at the dark liquid in my mug. The coordinated attack suddenly made structural sense. My cousins were not defending Beatrice out of love. They were protecting their own bank accounts. Valerie reached into her designer handbag. She produced a folded stack of printed papers and slid them across the table. "I intercepted the group chat," she explained. "I thought you should see their tactical planning before you make a move." I unfolded the pages. They were captured images of a private messaging thread. Julian's name dominated the conversation. He was outlining a detailed schedule for the relatives to call the main switchboard of my firm. He provided the direct email address of our managing partner. He instructed them to use words like unethical and fraudulent in their complaints. Beatrice chimed in, agreeing that a few days of severe corporate pressure would break my resolve. They intended to jeopardize my income until I surrendered the $50,000. A hot spike of anger flared behind my eyes. The injustice of the situation made my chest ache. I wanted to log on to the platform and release the offshore casino statements. I wanted to post the forged trust documents and expose Winston as a thief. I looked at Valerie. "I have the evidence to destroy their narrative," I told her. "I have the grandmother's real trust in this briefcase. I can prove they forged her signature to drain my equity. I can prove Julian is gambling the money away." Valerie shook her head. Her expression remained stern and unyielding. "Defending yourself in their arena is a trap. If you post those documents online, you enter a public mudslinging contest. The public does not care about the truth, Bridget. They care about the drama. You will look just as chaotic as they do. Your firm will still penalize you for the noise. You must not fight the branches. You have to sever the root." "What is the root?" I asked. My voice dropped to a whisper. Valerie leaned forward. The ambient noise of the espresso machine seemed to fade into the background. She looked around the empty cafe before speaking. "You are an auditor," she said. "You track the flow of resources. Ask yourself why Winston is willing to tear his own legacy apart to protect Julian. Ask yourself why Beatrice looks at her own son with such deep, unvarnished resentment." I recalled the dinner table from the night before, the flash of bitter anger in my mother's eyes when she demanded I pay for Julian's trip. It was the same look she gave him when he crashed his first luxury vehicle. It was the same look she gave him when he failed out of a prestigious university. It was never the look of a disappointed parent. It was the look of a captive. "Did you find the grandmother's metal lockbox?" Valerie asked, breaking my train of thought. I nodded slowly. "I recovered it this morning. The ledgers were inside." Valerie picked up her trench coat from the booth. "The bank statements and the trust ledger prove the theft," she said softly. "But the theft is only a symptom of the disease. Go back to the box. Look beneath the velvet lining at the bottom. Read the sealed adoption records. Once you understand who Julianne really is, the extortion will make perfect sense." She stood up, leaving a crisp $20 bill on the table. She walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the rainy afternoon. I sat alone in the booth. The printed screenshots of the family group chat rested next to my coffee mug. The threat to my career was imminent, but Valerie had just handed me the key to a much larger vault. I picked up my briefcase and held it against my chest. I needed to return to my apartment. I needed to tear that metal box apart and unearth the foundation of their lies. The rain poured heavily over the Wilmington streets as I drove away from the cafe and headed back toward the financial district. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth in a steady, relentless rhythm. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It read 4:15. The central bank branch locked its doors promptly at 5. I pressed my foot against the accelerator. The tires gripped the wet asphalt. I had left the metal container in the subterranean vault room earlier that morning, taking only the visible ledgers and the forged trust agreement. Aunt Valerie had left me with a specific instruction that echoed over and over in my mind. Go back to the box. Look beneath the velvet lining at the bottom. I parked my car in the visitor lot and bypassed the teller queue for the second time that day. The vault manager raised an eyebrow, but silently escorted me down the quiet, carpeted corridor. The dual locks clicked, and the heavy drawer slid out. I carried it to the private viewing table. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. I peered into the empty steel compartment. My fingertips brushed against the faded red velvet adhering to the interior base. The material felt stiff and brittle with age. I ran my nails along the edges until I found a loose corner near the back left hinge. I pulled upward with a sharp tug. The old adhesive groaned and tore away to reveal a false bottom constructed of thin aluminum. Beneath the metal sheet lay a flat manila envelope sealed with dark red wax. I broke the brittle seal with my thumb. The paper inside felt thick and powdery, leaving a fine dust on my skin. The first document I pulled out was a certificate of live birth. The edges of the page were yellowed and frayed from decades of storage. I scanned the typed black ink. The infant was listed as a baby boy, later formally amended to the name Julian. The mother was recorded as an unknown 22-year-old woman, but the line designating the father was not left blank. The name was explicitly printed, Winston Taylor. I stared at the dates stamped in the top right corner, 1994. I traced the faded numbers with my index finger, matching them to a specific timeline burned into our family lore. My mother, Beatrice, had supposedly taken a prestigious art history sabbatical in Europe during that exact year. She had vanished from the Delaware social scene for 10 months, returning with an infant she claimed she wanted to rescue from a foreign orphanage. She told everyone it was her philanthropic duty to adopt the child. That philanthropic story was a fabricated shield. The truth was far more sinister. Beatrice had been exiled to Europe to manage the fallout of Winston's indiscretion. The patriarch had forced his own daughter to legally adopt his illegitimate child. He needed to protect his pristine reputation among the corporate elites and the country club boards. The bloodline secret shattered the entire foundation of my reality. The puzzle pieces snapped together, bringing brutal clarity to the toxic environment that raised me. Julian was not my brother. He was my uncle. He was Winston's direct heir, born of a scandalous hidden affair. This revelation recontextualized every strange dynamic I had witnessed since childhood. It explained the unvarnished resentment I saw in Beatrice's eyes at the dinner table the night before. She despised Julian because he was a living, breathing monument to her father's betrayal and her own forced subjugation. She had been ordered to raise her half-sibling, pretending to be a loving maternal figure, while Winston pulled the invisible strings from his leather armchair. Beatrice had surrendered her youth to cover up a scandal. It also explained Julian's untouchable status within the hierarchy. He was the golden boy because he carried the direct patriarchal bloodline. He was never held accountable for his failed startups or his casino debts because Winston viewed the boy as an extension of his own monumental ego. And then there was my role in the dynasty. I was merely the utility player. I was the designated laborer expected to perform quietly and generate wealth for the collective fund. I thought back to my college years. They pushed me to secure academic scholarships and work grueling part-time jobs to pay for my own textbooks. Meanwhile, Julian received a brand new imported sports car for his 19th birthday and endless cash bailouts whenever his ventures collapsed. The $50,000 demand for the VIP World Cup tickets was not a grandfather asking a favor for a grandchild. It was Winston forcing me to subsidize the secret he was too cowardly to acknowledge publicly. They demanded my obedience as penance for a shared secret I did not even know existed. I was paying the rent on their glass house. The systemic generational deceit was staggering. They had weaponized the concept of loyalty to extract my resources and maintain their polished social facade. I gathered the fragile papers and placed them carefully inside my leather briefcase alongside the forged trust documents. The puzzle was complete. I possessed the root of their power. The evidence required to dismantle the Delaware holding company was sitting right in my hands. I closed the metal drawer and pushed it back into the wall slot. I walked out of the bank vault and stepped back into the rainy evening. I sat in the driver's seat of my car with the engine idling. The heater blew warm air against my cold hands. I did not feel the sting of betrayal anymore. The profound depth of their deception eradicated any lingering guilt or sorrow I might have harbored. I felt a cold, calculating calm settle over my mind. I was no longer an exiled daughter begging for scraps of affection. I was a senior financial investigator staring at a compromised enterprise. I planned to contact a ruthless corporate litigator first thing in the morning to initiate the estate reclamation. But the family did not intend to wait until morning. They were growing desperate. As I reached for the gear shift to put the car in drive, a unique, high-pitched chime emanated from my phone. It was not a text message tone. It was not a voicemail notification. It was a customized alert sound. After discovering the historical home equity fraud on my credit report the previous night, I had placed a silent security monitor on my Social Security number. I picked up the device. The screen displayed an urgent notification from a major domestic financial institution. A new premium travel credit card had just been approved in my name. The credit limit was $60,000. I opened the secure banking portal and reviewed the account details with clinical precision. The billing address had been routed directly to the Wilmington estate. I stared at the data, feeling a chill radiate through my chest. To bypass the modern security protocols, they would have needed intimate knowledge of my personal history. Beatrice knew my first childhood pet. She knew her own maiden name. She knew the street where I grew up. They had used the intimate details of my life to intercept the verification process. They had realized their social media smear campaign was not producing the desired check. So they bypassed my physical boundaries entirely. They had breached my identity. The extortion had officially crossed the line into federal fraud. The rain beat against the windshield of my car in heavy, rhythmic sheets. I sat in the bank parking lot staring at the digital alert on my phone screen. A premium travel credit card had been authorized in my name. The credit limit stood at $60,000. I did not scream or strike the steering wheel. I placed the phone on the passenger seat next to my leather briefcase. I shifted the car into drive and merged onto the wet streets of Wilmington. The extortion had evolved. My family had grown tired of waiting for my compliance. They had reached into the digital architecture of my life and stolen my identity. I navigated the evening traffic with a quiet, focused intensity. The vibrant city lights blurred through the rain-slicked glass. I understood the mechanics of the crime immediately. Modern banking protocols require specific authentications to open a high-tier account. They ask for personal historical data. They require details only an intimate relation would possess. Beatrice was the architect of this breach. She knew the name of my first childhood dog. She knew the exact street address of the house where I learned to ride a bicycle. She knew her own maiden name. She used the trivia of my upbringing to bypass the security algorithms. The very woman who raised me had weaponized my past to intercept the automated verification process. I parked in the secure underground garage of my apartment building. I gathered my belongings and rode the quiet elevator to my floor. I walked down the long carpeted hallway and unlocked my door. I stepped inside and turned the heavy brass deadbolt until it clicked into place. The lock isolated me from the physical world, but the true battle was unfolding in the digital realm. I dropped my wet coat on the entryway bench. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I walked straight into my home office. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The blue glow of the monitor illuminated the dark room. The cool light reflected in my eyes. I felt no fear. My face remained an emotionless mask. I logged into my secured financial monitoring dashboard. I needed to see the fresh wound they had carved into my credit file. The newly minted account appeared at the top of the interface. The billing address was routed directly to the sprawling family estate. They had not even tried to obscure their location. They operated under a profound blanket of arrogant immunity. As I watched the screen, the available balance refreshed. The numbers shifted in real time. The $60,000 limit dropped. A pending transaction materialized on the ledger. It was a charge for exactly $40,000. The vendor name populated a moment later. It was a premier luxury sports concierge service headquartered in New York. They specialized in securing elite hospitality packages for global sporting events. The VIP World Cup tickets were officially purchased. I rested my hands on the cool aluminum surface of the laptop. I analyzed their strategic calculus. The family assumed they had trapped me in an inescapable corner. In the corporate finance sector, a ruined credit score is a professional death sentence. My firm required strict ethical and financial clearances for all senior auditors. Delinquent debts or public bankruptcies would trigger an automatic termination of my employment contract. Winston and Beatrice knew this. They believed I would look at the $40,000 charge and panic. They assumed I would quietly pay the monthly installments to protect my pristine credit rating and avoid a scandalous public investigation. They thought they were holding my career hostage. They treated the theft like a forced loan, expecting me to absorb the cost just to make the problem vanish. They miscalculated the depth of my resolve. I was not the obedient utility player they raised. I was an investigator trained to dismantle fraudulent enterprises. I opened a new secure folder on my desktop and labeled it Evidence. I did not call the estate to beg them to cancel the transaction. I did not shed a single tear over the betrayal. I built a comprehensive digital dossier. I started with the application footprint. I utilized my industry access to pull the origination data for the fraudulent credit line. I captured the digital timestamps. I traced the specific Internet protocol addresses used during the application process. The numeric string routed directly back to the private network installed at the family estate. I logged the precise geographical coordinates. I pulled the vendor contact information for the sports concierge service, recording their corporate phone numbers and merchant identification codes. I captured high-resolution screenshots of every digital footprint Beatrice and Julian left behind. I worked in the silent blue glow of the monitor for nearly 2 hours. I compiled the login locations, the IP addresses, the vendor details, and the exact sequence of the verification bypass. I organized the data into sterile, chronological spreadsheets. Every keystroke severed another emotional tie I had left to those people. I crossed a point of no return. This was no longer a dysfunctional family dispute over dinner table expectations. This was a documented federal crime. They had committed felony identity theft and wire fraud across state lines. The Delaware dynasty was nothing more than a criminal syndicate hiding behind expensive suits and manicured lawns. I finished compiling the dossier and saved the encrypted file to a secure external drive. I leaned back in my office chair. The apartment was perfectly still. I had the ledger from the safe deposit box proving the historical trust fraud. I had the adoption records proving the secret bloodline. Now I had the digital evidence proving the identity theft. The arsenal was complete. My phone vibrated on the desk. The sudden movement rattled against the wood. I picked up the device and looked at the screen. A new text message had just arrived. The sender was Julian. The preview text read clearly on the illuminated glass. He was emboldened by the successful transaction. He felt invincible, sitting in his inherited luxury, believing he had outsmarted the sister he viewed as a mere utility. I unlocked the phone and opened the message thread. "Thanks for the tickets, sis," the text read. "See you at the finals." I stared at the words. He could not resist the urge to gloat. His monumental ego demanded that he rub the victory in my face. He thought the message would crush my spirit. He thought it would serve as a painful reminder of my defeat. Instead, he had just handed me a written confession. He tied himself directly to the fraudulent $40,000 purchase. He provided the exact intent and the specific destination of the stolen funds. I pressed the side buttons on my phone. The screen flashed as I captured the screenshot. I sent the image directly into the encrypted evidence folder alongside the IP addresses and the trust ledgers. The final piece of the puzzle clicked perfectly into place. Julian had woven his own rope. I set the phone down and closed the laptop. The blue light vanished, leaving the room in shadows. I knew my next move. I could not handle a federal crime with a simple confrontation. I needed a professional weapon. I needed a corporate litigator who specialized in high net worth disputes and complex financial fraud. I needed someone who understood how to execute a legal strike without warning. The family thought they had forced my hand. They had no idea they had just authorized their own destruction. Tomorrow morning, I would deliver the dossier to the sharpest attorney in Delaware, and the real war would begin. The morning air was crisp and biting as I walked into the lobby of the most feared corporate litigation firm in Delaware. Evelyn Sterling occupied the penthouse suite. She was a woman who dismantled dynastic wealth for a living. Her silver hair was cut in a sharp, immaculate bob. Her office possessed the warmth of an operating room. No family photos decorated her polished concrete desk. She operated in a realm of pure, factual warfare. I sat in a structured leather chair across from her and opened my briefcase. I placed the printed dossier, the encrypted drive, the casino, bank statements, the true trust ledgers, and the adoption records onto the cold surface between us. I did not offer a tearful backstory. I provided a chronological sequence of events. I explained the dinner table extortion, the workplace ambush, the historical equity theft, and the recent identity breach. Finally, I slid the printed screenshot of Julian's text message across the desk. Evelyn did not interrupt. She read every page. Her eyes scanned the data with predatory speed. She processed the fraudulent signatures and the offshore wire transfers. When she finished reading the text message confession, she placed the paper down. She picked up a heavy silver pen. She tapped it once against the concrete, then set it down. She neatly aligned the silver pen perfectly parallel to my dossier. The sharp geometric adjustment signaled a profound transition. The chaos of my family dynamics was officially over. We had entered the realm of cold legal order. "This is not a family dispute, Bridget," she said. Her voice was smooth and resonant. "This is an actionable federal offense. Your grandfather believes his wealth insulates him from consequences. We are going to prove him wrong. We will not engage in a screaming match. We will execute a paperwork guillotine." I nodded. "What is our first strike?" "We sever their access and criminalize their actions," she replied. Evelyn pressed a button on her phone console, summoning her senior paralegal. The operation commenced with breathtaking speed. First, we contacted the national credit bureaus. I authorized a total security freeze on my Social Security number, locking down my financial identity. We formally disputed the $40,000 charge. Then came the irrevocable step. We dialed the local police department. I sat in the cold office and gave my official statement to a fraud detective over a secure line. I provided Beatrice's name and Julian's name. I detailed the unauthorized use of my personal history to bypass the bank security protocols. I handed over the IP addresses routing back to the estate. It was a heavy, definitive moment. I was initiating a criminal investigation against the woman who raised me and the man I grew up calling my brother. I felt a brief shadow of grief, but it vanished the second I remembered the decade of theft they had orchestrated behind my back. The detective issued a formal case number. The trap was set. Next, Evelyn directed her attention to the luxury sports concierge service in New York. She placed the call on speakerphone. A cheerful customer service representative answered, expecting to finalize the World Cup hospitality itinerary. Evelyn introduced herself as my legal counsel. She provided the police report number and informed the vendor they had processed a fraudulent transaction involving stolen identity. The cheerful tone evaporated. The representative stammered, placing us on a brief hold. A senior risk manager picked up the line seconds later. Corporate vendors despise liability. The moment Evelyn mentioned the words federal wire fraud and accessory to identity theft, the risk manager panicked. He assured us the transaction would be voided instantly. Cancel the VIP tickets, Evelyn instructed. Revoke the itinerary. Notify the primary beneficiary that his reservation is terminated due to criminal fraud. The manager agreed without hesitation. The $40,000 debt was erased from my ledger. The fallout struck the estate less than an hour later. Julian was reportedly enjoying a late lunch at the country club when his phone received the automated cancellation email from the concierge. His prestigious VIP package disappeared into thin air. The public humiliation of losing his status in front of his wealthy peers shattered his fragile ego. He called Winston in a panic. The patriarch suddenly realized the credit card scheme had failed. Worse, he realized I had involved the authorities. Winston possessed a volatile temper when cornered. The realization of his own criminal exposure sent him into a frantic rage. He could not undo the police report, so he reached for the only weapon he believed he still controlled. He decided to use the corporate power of the Delaware Holding Company to crush my defiance. He wanted to starve me into submission. I was still sitting in Evelyn's office reviewing the trust reclamation strategy when her receptionist knocked on the glass door. A bonded courier had just arrived in the lobby requesting my signature. The receptionist handed me a thick manila envelope bearing the wax seal of Winston's corporate attorneys. I sliced the envelope open and pulled out a stack of preliminary legal notices. I read the cover letter out loud. Winston had convened an emergency meeting of the holding company trustees. He used his authority as the patriarch to formally disinherit me. The documents declared my immediate removal from the family enterprise. He severed all my future dividends, canceled my access to the estate properties, and explicitly erased my name from the inheritance hierarchy. He expects you to panic, Evelyn observed, watching my face. He believes he just cut off your oxygen. He thinks you will drop the criminal charges to regain your seat at the table. I looked at the legal notices. The language was harsh and punishing. Winston painted me as a rogue asset who needed to be discarded for the survival of the dynasty. He assumed the threat of financial ruin would force me to crawl back to the estate and beg for forgiveness. He was playing a game of corporate chess, assuming he controlled all the valuable pieces on the board. But Winston was operating under a fatal misconception. He believed the forged will he filed 15 years ago was the only existing blueprint of the family wealth. He had no idea that I had visited the subterranean bank vault that morning. He had no idea that Aunt Valerie had guided me toward the truth. I placed Winston's disinheritance papers on the concrete desk, right next to my grandmother's true trust ledger. The contrast between the two documents was poetic. One was a desperate illusion of power. The other was an indisputable legal reality. Let him file the removal notices, I told Evelyn. Let him tell the entire board of trustees that he is casting me out. Evelyn smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous expression. When an adversary is making a fatal mistake, you never interrupt them. He is building a fortress on top of a sinkhole. We spent the rest of the afternoon drafting the countermeasure. Winston intended to starve me out. He planned to publicly humiliate me and strip away my legacy. But he was entirely unaware that Evelyn and I were already holding the ultimate trump card. We did not just possess the evidence to send Julian and Beatrice to prison. We possessed the original legal authority to evict Winston from his own throne. The patriarch was preparing for a minor family skirmish while I was quietly positioning the paperwork guillotine directly over his corporate empire, and the blade was about to fall during the most important public event of the social season. I sat in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Evelyn Sterling's law office, staring at the heavy cream-colored parchment Winston had delivered. The legal language was thick with arrogance and entitlement. He had formally served me with disinheritance papers. The document declared me permanently severed from the family enterprise, stripped of all future dividends, and exiled from the estate. It was a corporate excommunication designed to break my spirit. He expected me to receive those papers and collapse into a panic. He imagined I would pick up the phone, crying, begging for a second chance to write the $50,000 check for Julian's vacation. Instead, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The man who had spent 3 decades dictating my worth had just handed me written proof of his own delusion. Evelyn sat across the concrete desk reviewing the authentic trust documents we had pulled from the subterranean vault earlier that week. She did not express outrage over Winston's audacity. She simply analyzed the mechanics of his impending downfall. The Delaware holding company was governed by an overarching legal board. It consisted of 5 senior corporate attorneys who managed the fiduciary compliance of the vast enterprise. They believed Winston was the legitimate patriarch because they had only ever seen the forged will he presented 15 years ago. They had facilitated his financial control without questioning the underlying authority. We were about to introduce them to the undeniable truth. I reached into my leather briefcase and retrieved the pristine, original copy of my grandmother's true trust. The paper felt heavy and authoritative, carrying the weight of delayed justice. I carefully slid the document into a clear plastic evidence sleeve, smoothing the edges with my thumb. I handled the pages with meticulous precision, treating the packet like a loaded weapon. This was the instrument that would dismantle the Delaware dynasty. Evelyn arranged an emergency hearing with the fiduciary board the following morning. We arrived at their corporate headquarters situated in the wealthiest sector of the financial district. The boardroom was an intimidating space, paneled in dark walnut and dominated by a sprawling marble table. The 5 board members sat in high-backed leather chairs, looking impatient and annoyed. They were accustomed to rubber-stamping Winston's directives and managing minor disputes. They assumed we were there to file a pathetic appeal regarding my disinheritance. The lead counsel, a gray-haired man named Harrison, cleared his throat. "Ms. Taylor," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "we received your grandfather's notice of removal. While we understand this is a difficult personal matter, the board must uphold the directives of the primary shareholder. Your removal from the trust is binding and effective immediately." Evelyn stood up. She did not raise her voice. She projected a lethal and terrifying calm. "Winston Taylor is not the primary shareholder," she stated. "He has been operating under fraudulent authority for 15 years. Harrison frowned, deepening the wrinkles around his eyes. "That is a dangerous accusation, Ms. Sterling. The estate probate was settled long ago. We have the certified will on file, and the signatures were authenticated at the time of your grandmother's passing." Evelyn walked around the marble table and placed the plastic evidence sleeve directly in front of Harrison. "I invite you to review the original sealed trust executed by the late matriarch," she said. "It was secured in a private depository overseen by an independent executor until my client reached her designated age of maturity, a milestone she passed 2 months ago upon turning 32. The document you have on file is a forgery designed to bypass the true chain of succession." The vast room grew incredibly quiet. Harrison adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the sleeve. He read the first page. Then he turned to the second. The color slowly drained from his face, leaving him pale and shaken. The other 4 attorneys leaned in, their eyes darting across the legal clauses. The authentic trust was explicit and airtight. My grandmother had bypassed Winston entirely. She recognized his insatiable greed and legally shielded the empire from his grasp. The true document transferred the controlling shares of the holding company directly to me. Harrison looked up from the parchment. His arrogance evaporated. instantly replaced by the terrifying realization of corporate liability. "If this document is verified," he whispered, "it means Winston committed active estate fraud. It means every real estate transaction, every dividend payout, and every asset liquidation we authorized was based on stolen authority. It means my client is the majority shareholder." Evelyn corrected him sharply. "It means Bridget Taylor owns the Delaware Holding Company. She owns the residential estate where Winston currently resides, and she maintains absolute control over the discretionary funds subsidizing Julian's shell corporations." I sat in my chair, maintaining perfect posture. My face remained a mask of professional detachment, but my internal world was undergoing a seismic shift. The psychological dynamic of my entire existence inverted in that singular moment. For my whole life, I believed I was the dependent. I believed I owed them my labor and my obedience just to keep a roof over my head. I let them treat me like a disposable utility player. When I walked out of that dining room in the freezing cold, I thought I was leaving their kingdom. But the truth was, they had been living in my house. They had been spending my money. Winston did not own the wealth he used to threaten me. I did. The mahogany table where he demanded the $50,000 belonged to me. The crystal flutes belonged to me. I possessed the legal right to evict my parents from their manicured lawns and liquidate every single venture Julian had ever touched. The millions of dollars funneled into his offshore gambling habits had been stolen directly from my inheritance. The fiduciary board convened an immediate internal audit. They sequestered the forged will and initiated the strict legal protocol to transfer the controlling shares into my name. The corporate restructuring would take exactly 1 week to finalize. During that window, the board was legally obligated to notify Winston of the impending transfer and the discovery of his historical fraud. Word reached the family estate by nightfall. The shift in their behavior was instantaneous. I did not receive any more voicemails demanding payment for World Cup tickets. I did not receive any more mocking text messages from Julian. The digital smear campaign on social media vanished. Beatrice deleted her manipulative posts. The sudden quiet was not a sign of surrender. It was the sound of total, unadulterated panic. Winston realized his criminal exposure was absolute. He was already facing federal identity theft charges from the credit card scheme. Now he faced massive civil liability for decades of estate fraud. Beatrice realized her lavish lifestyle and her stolen diamonds were evaporating. Julian realized his endless stream of luxury funding was permanently severed. They were staring at their own impending ruin. The dynasty was collapsing under the weight of its own deception. But people who survive on manipulation do not simply walk away when they lose their leverage. They mutate into something far worse. Evelyn warned me that cornered predators are the most dangerous adversaries. Winston knew the corporate restructuring would be finalized in 7 days. Once the ink dried on the transfer documents, he would lose everything. He needed me to sign a settlement. He needed me to voluntarily relinquish the shares and drop the criminal complaints before the board completed the transition. Since he could no longer intimidate me in private, he decided to drag the battle into the most public arena possible. He knew I valued my professional reputation above all else. He knew I abhorred public spectacles and emotional scenes. So the family plotted an explosive final measure. They intended to hijack a highly publicized event and force a settlement through sheer public terror. I was scheduled to host a major corporate charity gala at the end of the week. It was the crowning achievement of my auditing career, attended by the wealthiest executives in the city. And my family was preparing to turn it into a war zone. The grand ballroom of the historical hotel in downtown Wilmington was a sensory masterpiece of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 300 of the most powerful corporate executives, politicians, and banking partners in the state. The air carried the scent of expensive orchids and roasted tenderloin. A string quartet played a soft classical arrangement in the corner. I stood near the center of the room, holding a flute of sparkling water. I was hosting the annual Financial Literacy Foundation Gala. It was the crowning achievement of my professional year. I wore a structured emerald evening gown that felt more like armor than silk. I projected the image of a calm, successful senior auditor. But beneath the polished exterior, every nerve in my body was coiled and ready. I knew they were coming. Evelyn Sterling had warned me that a cornered predator always chooses the most destructive path. Winston understood that the fiduciary board would finalize the corporate restructuring in a matter of days. He knew his reign over the Delaware holding company was evaporating. He could not stop the legal transition in a courtroom, so he decided to hijack my professional sanctuary. He intended to weaponize my fear of public humiliation to force a signed settlement. I stationed a 6-person private security detail around the perimeter of the ballroom. They wore dark, tailored suits, blending seamlessly into the elite crowd. Evelyn stood near the coat check, holding a leather portfolio. We were not merely bracing for an impact. We had orchestrated a flawless trap. The heavy mahogany doors at the entrance swung open. The ambient chatter near the foyer quieted as Winston, Beatrice, and Julian stepped into the ballroom. They dressed with the calculated elegance of old money. Winston wore a bespoke tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Beatrice draped herself in navy silk. Julian wore a velvet dinner jacket and an arrogant scowl. They surveyed the room until their eyes locked onto me. They moved through the crowd with singular, terrifying purpose. They bypassed the silent auction tables and the champagne trays. Watching them approach, I felt a strange sense of detachment. A week ago, the sight of my grandfather marching toward me with a hardened jaw would have triggered a severe panic response. I would have calculated the fastest exit route to avoid a scene. Tonight, I simply took a sip of my sparkling water and waited. The dramatic irony of the moment was profound. They were walking across a ballroom paid for by a corporate account they no longer controlled. They were preparing to threaten a woman who secretly owned their entire empire. Beatrice reached me first. She initiated the performance instantly, her eyes filled with practiced, glistening tears. She reached out with a trembling hand, placing her manicured fingers gently on my forearm. "Bridget, please," she whispered. Her voice carried just enough volume to draw the attention of the managing partners standing a few feet away. "We are begging you to stop this madness. You are tearing our family apart over a misunderstanding. Your grandfather has not slept in days. We just want to heal." I looked down at her hand. I did not pull away. I let the onlookers see her grasping at me. I let them see the desperation hiding beneath her expensive perfume. Winston stepped forward, eclipsing Beatrice. He positioned himself to block my line of sight to the main exit. He leaned in close. The scent of his heavy cologne masked the faint metallic smell of nervous sweat. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and withdrew a folded legal document. "You are going to walk with us into the private VIP lounge right now," Winston murmured. His baritone voice was a gravelly threat, devoid of any familial warmth. "You are going to sign this relinquishment agreement. You will drop the police report against your brother, and you will release your claim on the trust. If you refuse, I will start shouting. I will tell every executive in this room that you are an unstable, vindictive liar who preys on her own relatives. I will end your career tonight." He shoved the folded settlement paper toward my chest. He expected me to snatch it. He expected the fear of a public scandal to break my composure. He relied on the lifelong conditioning he had installed in my mind. He thought I would shrink to protect the peace. I did not shrink. I maintained my posture, looking directly into his cold gray eyes. "You do not have the authority to end a conversation, Winston," I replied calmly, "let alone my career." His jaw tightened. The veins in his neck pulsed against his starched white collar. He opened his mouth to raise his voice, preparing to execute his threat. But before he could utter a single syllable, I gave a subtle nod toward the edge of the room. A man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped out from the crowd of guests. He was not a banking executive or a foundation donor. He was an elite process server hired by Evelyn's firm. He moved with swift, undeniable precision. He stepped directly between Winston and me, blocking the patriarch's physical advance. "Winston Taylor," he stated clearly. "Beatrice Taylor. Julian Taylor." Winston blinked, staring at the stranger in confusion. "Yes? Who are you?" The process server raised his hands. He held 3 thick legal envelopes. He pressed the first packet against Winston's chest, forcing the older man to take it. He handed the second to Beatrice and the third to Julian. "You have been served," he announced. His voice was loud enough to carry over the string quartet. Winston recoiled, gripping the thick paper envelope. He looked down at the legal seal. He tore the top flap open, pulling out the stack of formal documents. He flipped past the initial cover letter. At that exact second, a hired event photographer stepped past the group to capture a candid shot of the gala attendees. The photographer raised his camera and pressed the shutter. The bright white flash illuminated the space. The brilliant burst of light struck Winston's face precisely as his eyes focused on the bold black header printed across the top page. Notice of immediate corporate restructuring and civil fraud. I watched the color drain entirely from Winston's cheeks in the aftermath of the flash. The patriarch's imposing physical presence seemed to hollow out from the inside. He read the clauses detailing the fiduciary board's verification of the true trust. He read the mandate demanding the immediate surrender of all holding company assets. He realized the settlement paper shaking in his own hand was entirely useless. He was holding a ransom note for a kingdom he had already lost. Beatrice ripped her envelope open. She pulled out a personalized cease and desist order alongside a civil lawsuit for conspiracy to commit estate fraud. She gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. The practiced tears vanished, replaced by genuine, unadulterated terror. The social standing she worshipped was crumbling into dust right in the middle of a crowded ballroom. Julian stared at his own documents. He held a copy of the federal police report detailing the credit card identity theft, along with an injunction freezing all his personal banking assets. The realization hit him with physical force. His endless stream of luxury funding was dead. His offshore casino accounts were blocked. He possessed no wealth, no leverage, and no future in the corporate world. He looked up from the papers, his face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate rage. The golden boy persona shattered, leaving behind a cornered, frantic thief. "You did this to me," he screamed. He dropped the legal packet onto the marble floor. He lunged across the short distance separating us, raising his hands to grab my shoulders. He intended to drag me down to the floor to inflict physical harm because his psychological weapons had failed. He never reached me. 2 members of my private security detail intercepted him instantly. A tall guard caught Julian's momentum, spinning him around and pinning his arms firmly behind his back. The second guard stepped in front of me, forming an impenetrable human shield. Julian thrashed against the physical restraint, kicking his polished leather shoes against the marble tile. He shouted incoherent threats, demanding his money, demanding his inheritance, demanding his life back. The string quartet stopped playing. The ballroom fell silent except for the sound of Julian's frantic struggles. 300 of the most influential citizens in Delaware watched the heir to the Taylor dynasty reduced to a restrained, screaming threat. Winston stood paralyzed. The man who dictated my every move for 32 years could not even speak. He watched the security team drag his illegitimate son toward the service elevators. The public humiliation was total and irreversible. They had walked into the gala intending to corner their obedient utility player. Instead, they walked into a legally binding public execution of their empire. I turned away from Winston and Beatrice. I did not offer a parting remark. I simply walked back toward the center of the room, signaling the quartet to resume playing. The trap had sprung, flawlessly, severing their power forever. But as I watched the service doors close behind Julian, I knew the final chapter was far from over. Stripped of his resources and facing federal prison, the desperate golden boy was going to need cash immediately to flee the jurisdiction. And I had already placed the perfect bait for him to find. The morning following the charity gala arrived with a sharp, freezing wind blowing off the Christina River. I woke up in my quiet apartment feeling a strange, unfamiliar lightness. The emerald evening gown hung on the back of my bedroom door, a silent testament to the public execution of the Taylor dynasty. I walked into the kitchen and brewed a pot of dark roast coffee. The silence of my home felt different today. It was no longer a fortress shielding me from their psychological warfare. It was an observation deck. I was simply waiting to watch the final pillar of their empire collapse. Julian was a man who possessed expensive tastes and zero survival instincts. He had spent his entire life insulated by Winston's vast wealth. Whenever his startups failed or his gambling debts spiraled out of control, the patriarch simply wrote a check to make the problem disappear. But the legal injunction delivered at the gala had frozen every single account tied to the Delaware holding company. His offshore casino routes were blocked, his premium credit lines were severed. He knew the identity theft investigation was accelerating. He knew the authorities were preparing to file formal charges for the credit card fraud. He needed liquid cash immediately to flee the jurisdiction before the arrest warrants were issued. Evelyn Sterling and I had anticipated his panic. When we locked down my financial identity and initiated the corporate restructuring, we made a deliberate, tactical decision. We sealed the vault, but we left one small window unlocked. It was a decoy bank account. It was an old commercial real estate escrow holding, originally set up during my early days at the auditing firm. We funded it with $200,000 and left it visible under a legacy routing number. It was a staggering amount of money to an average person, but to Julian, it was just enough cash to secure a private flight and a quiet disappearance. We did not just leave the money sitting there. We weaponized it. Evelyn worked directly with the bank executives to place a silent tripwire on the routing number. If anyone attempted to authorize a manual withdrawal or a wire transfer without my direct biometric verification, the system would automatically freeze the terminal and alert the local authorities. We built a digital snare and placed it right in his path. I sat at my kitchen island holding my warm coffee mug. The digital clock on the microwave read 9:15. The downtown financial branches had just opened their doors. I watched the city traffic moving sluggishly far below my window. A sharp electronic ding resonated through the quiet kitchen. The sound originated from my phone, resting on the marble countertop. It was a unique, high-pitched notification, distinct from my standard text alerts. I set my coffee mug down. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. The banking application displayed a bright red priority banner. A wire transfer request for $195,000 had just been initiated at a physical branch 3 miles away from my apartment. The destination was a numbered account in a non-extradition jurisdiction. The verification method listed on the screen was a forged physical signature. The trap had officially closed. I did not move. I stared at the glowing pixels tracing the digital footprint of his desperation. Julian had walked into the bank branch believing his forged signature and his arrogant demeanor would force the teller to bypass standard protocols. He thought he was outsmarting the system. He had no idea he was stepping onto a predetermined target. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from Evelyn. I answered the line, placing the device on speakerphone. "He took the bait," she announced. Her voice was crisp and devoid of any sympathy. "He is currently in custody." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Tell me the details," I said. "He walked into the primary downtown branch demanding an expedited international wire transfer," Evelyn explained. "He presented the forged authorization slip using your signature. He acted entitled and impatient, hoping to intimidate the branch manager into rushing the transaction." The teller processed the paperwork, and the silent system flag activated immediately. The manager offered him a cup of premium coffee and asked him to wait in a private office while the funds cleared. He sat there sipping espresso while 3 police cruisers surrounded the building. I pictured the scene playing out in a sterile bank lobby, the golden boy expecting a seamless escape route, instead facing the harsh reality of federal law enforcement. The officers entered the private office, Evelyn continued. He tried to run. He shoved a chair into the path of a deputy and attempted to bolt through the rear emergency exit. They tackled him before he reached the door. He was caught on the high-definition security cameras committing felony wire fraud while resisting arrest. The footage is indisputable. They hauled him out through the main lobby in handcuffs. Winston's empire crumbled into dust with that single arrest. The patriarch had spent decades forging documents and ruining lives to protect his illegitimate son. He had sacrificed my inheritance and my mother's youth to maintain the pristine illusion of his bloodline. Now, his secret heir was a documented felon, sitting in a concrete holding cell facing decades in a federal penitentiary. The scandal would dominate the local news cycle by nightfall. The pristine Delaware dynasty was reduced to a spectacular criminal failure. Evelyn ended the call, leaving me alone in the quiet apartment. I walked into my home office and sat down at the desk. I felt a profound, overarching clarity. The heavy fog of obligation and fear that had choked me since childhood was entirely gone. I breathed in the clean, cedar-scented air of my sanctuary. My phone screen lit up once more. A new voicemail notification appeared. It was the 201st message I had received since walking out of the dinner party. The caller identification displayed Beatrice's personal number. I pressed the speaker icon. I did not need to transcribe this message into my factual spreadsheet. The data collection phase was over. Bridget, the audio crackled. The voice on the recording was unrecognizable. It was stripped of all maternal authority and hollowed out by pure terror. It was reduced to a raw, pathetic whisper. "Please, you have to stop this. They took him. They put him in the back of a police car. Your grandfather is having a panic attack in his study. The lawyers are saying they cannot post bail because the holding company assets are frozen. We have nothing. Please pick up the phone. I am begging you." She sobbed into the receiver. It was not the calculated theatrical crying she used at the gala or the dinner table. It was the sound of a woman realizing her entire existence was a fabricated lie that had just been exposed to the world. The vintage diamond choker could not save her. The manicured lawns could not protect her. She was a captive mourning the loss of her cage. The recording ended with a soft click. I sat perfectly still, listening to the silence that followed. A month ago, that sound would have triggered a deep instinctual need to fix her pain. I would have rushed to the estate to offer my savings and my professional skills. I would have traded my own peace to stabilize their chaos. But looking at the cold numbers and the legal ledgers, I felt zero guilt. I felt only the quiet satisfaction of a balanced equation. I deleted the voicemail. I did not block her number. I wanted the line to remain open so they could listen to it ring endlessly. I wanted them to experience the vast, unbridgeable distance I had placed between us. I picked up the phone and dialed Evelyn's direct line. She answered on the first ring. "The police have him," I said. "The civil suits are filed. The trust restructuring is imminent. It is time to end the game." "I agree," Evelyn replied. "I am drafting the final surrender documents now. I will contact Winston's corporate counsel this afternoon. We will not negotiate over the phone, and we will not visit their territory. I am summoning them to my conference room tomorrow morning. Make sure they understand the parameters I instructed. They do not get to argue. They do not get to explain. They only get to sign." Evelyn chuckled, a sharp, brief sound of approval. "They will understand, Bridget. They have no other choice. They are arriving unarmed to a battle they have already lost." I hung up the phone. The rain had stopped falling outside my window, leaving the city washed clean and bright under the winter sun. The trap had successfully closed, neutralizing every threat they possessed. I spent the remainder of the day preparing my tailored suit and reviewing the final settlement terms. Tomorrow, I would walk into the glass-walled conference room and watch the patriarch sign away his kingdom. The extraction was over. The execution was about to begin. The conference room at Evelyn Sterling's law firm sat 40 floors above the city. It was a stark, geometric space, constructed entirely of glass and brushed steel. There were no dark mahogany walls to absorb secrets, and no heavy drapery to muffle the truth. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating every corner of the room. It was the exact opposite of the suffocating dining room where my nightmare began. This space was designed for transparency and calculated execution. I sat at the head of the long glass table. Evelyn sat to my right with her leather portfolio resting neatly in front of her. We waited in silence. The heavy door clicked open. Winston entered first. The patriarch of the Taylor dynasty looked a decade older than he had at the charity gala. His broad shoulders sagged beneath his tailored suit jacket. The imposing aura he carried for his entire life had vanished, leaving behind a hollow, tired man. Beatrice followed a few steps behind him. She wore a dark trench coat and oversized sunglasses she slowly removed as she approached the table. Her eyes were red and swollen. Julian walked in last. He was out on emergency restrictive bail pending his arraignment. He did not wear velvet or cashmere today. He wore a wrinkled gray suit. His skin possessed a sickly pallor, and he kept his gaze fixed firmly on the floor. They took their seats on the opposite side of the glass table. The physical distance between us was only 3 feet, but the psychological chasm was infinite. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The ambient hum of the building ventilation system was the only sound in the room. Winston cleared his throat. He placed his hands on the table and attempted to summon the familiar paternal cadence he had used to control me since childhood. "Bridget, my dear," he began, his voice raspy and weak. "We have suffered enough over these last few days. The family is broken. We are here to apologize and find a way to heal this wound before it destroys us all." I raised my right hand. The gesture was small but firm. "Stop," I commanded. Winston closed his mouth. "There will be no emotional appeals in this room," I stated. My tone was flat and devoid of any familial warmth. "We are not here to heal. We are here to process a transaction. You will speak only when Evelyn or I ask you a direct question. If you attempt to manipulate the narrative or invoke family loyalty, the meeting is over and we will let the federal prosecutors handle the rest. Do you understand the parameters?" Winston swallowed hard. He gave a slow, stiff nod. I looked at Evelyn. She opened her leather portfolio and extracted 4 distinct folders. She lined them up perfectly parallel to the edge of the glass table. I rested my hands in my lap and directed my attention to Julian. "Folder 1 contains the digital footprint of your identity theft," I said. "It holds the IP addresses, the forged authorization logs, and the vendor records for the $60,000 credit line you opened in my name. Folder 2 holds the high-definition security footage from the downtown bank branch. It shows you committing federal wire fraud while attempting to access a decoy account. The district attorney has a flawless case. You are facing significant time in a federal penitentiary." Julian flinched. He squeezed his eyes shut as if the words caused physical pain. He offered no defense. I shifted my gaze to Winston. "Folder 3 contains the historical ledgers from my grandmother's safe deposit box," I continued. "It holds the pristine original trust document she drafted 15 years ago, the document you suppressed using a forged will. It details the millions of dollars you illegally extracted from my inheritance to fund offshore gambling debts. You committed severe estate fraud. You stole the holding company." Winston opened his mouth to formulate an excuse. His instinct to protect his ego fought against the reality of his defeat. "I thought I was protecting the legacy," he whispered. "You were protecting your own pride," I corrected him. Which brings us to the final folder. I reached across the table and placed my hand on the 4th file. This folder contains the sealed adoption records hidden beneath the false bottom of the metal lockbox. It contains the original birth certificate from 1994. The air in the conference room seemed to turn into a vacuum. Winston froze. Beatrice inhaled a sharp, ragged breath and pressed a trembling hand against her mouth. Julian looked up from the floor, his brow furrowed in confusion. He did not understand the significance of the year. I looked directly into Beatrice's eyes. "You did not adopt a child from a foreign orphanage during your sabbatical," I stated softly. "You were sent away to cover up your father's indiscretion. You were forced to raise his illegitimate son. You spent your entire adult life mothering your own half-brother, to protect Winston's reputation among the Delaware elite. Julian turned his head toward Winston, staring at the old man in sheer horror. The golden boy realized his entire existence was a fabricated shield. He was not a beloved grandson. He was a covered-up scandal. Winston refused to look at him. The patriarch stared straight ahead, his face flushed with a deep, profound shame. The secret that drove decades of extortion and psychological abuse was laid bare under the bright morning sun. You built a dynasty on a foundation of lies I told them, and you expected me to pay the mortgage? That arrangement ends today. Evelyn slid a thick stack of legal documents across the glass surface. These are the terms of your surrender, she announced. They are non-negotiable. I outlined the demands with meticulous precision. First, Winston would sign the irrevocable transfer deeds. He would surrender all remaining shares of the Delaware Holding Company without contest. He would vacate his seat on the board and forfeit any claim to the estate properties. He would walk away from the empire with nothing more than a modest retirement stipend managed by an independent third party. Second, Beatrice would issue a public retraction on every social media platform she utilized. She would post a drafted statement admitting her previous accusations were entirely false and apologizing for her defamatory campaign against my professional reputation. If you sign these documents, I said, I will provide a single concession. I will contact the district attorney regarding Julian's wire fraud charges. I will advise the prosecutor that the primary victim seeks financial restitution rather than maximum federal prison time. I will offer a leniency recommendation. It is the only lifeline keeping you out of a cell, Julian. They sat in stunned silence. They had walked into the building hoping to negotiate a compromise. They realized they were attending their own corporate funeral. Beatrice reached for the documents. Her hands shook as she pulled the papers closer. Before you sign anything, I said. She looked up at me. My gaze dropped to her throat. She was wearing a high-collared silk blouse, but the subtle sparkle of diamonds peeked through the fabric. It was the vintage diamond choker that belonged to my grandmother. She had worn it to the meeting as a final, desperate cling to her former status. Take off the necklace, I instructed. Beatrice blinked. The color drained from her cheeks. Bridget, please, she whispered. This is the only piece I have left to remember her. It was never yours to remember her by, I replied, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. She left it to me. You claimed it the day after the funeral. Unbuckle it and leave it on the table. Beatrice hesitated. She looked at Winston for support, but the patriarch kept his eyes glued to the transfer deeds. She reached behind her neck. Her fingers fumbled with the delicate platinum clasp. The tiny click echoed in the quiet room. She pulled the diamond choker away from her skin and placed it onto the glass table. The jewels caught the morning sunlight, casting sharp prisms across the room. It was the ultimate physical surrender of her stolen royalty. Winston leaned forward. He stared at the signature line on the final corporate transfer deed. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a heavy, gold monogrammed fountain pen. It was the same pen he used to sign the forged will 15 years ago. It was the symbol of his authority. He unstitched the cap and hovered the gold nib over the paper. He tried to press down, but his muscles betrayed him. A tremor started in his fingers and quickly traveled up his forearm. He was a man accustomed to absolute control, recognizing the exact moment his power evaporated forever. His hand shook with such force that he could no longer hold the instrument. The heavy gold pen slipped from his grip. It hit the glass table with a sharp, echoing clatter. It rolled across the smooth, transparent surface and bumped gently against the diamond necklace. Winston stared at the fallen pen. His shoulders collapsed. The fight drained out of him, leaving an empty, broken shell. He realized his legacy, his wealth, and his freedom were entirely at the mercy of the granddaughter he had tried to discard. He slowly reached out, picking up a cheap plastic pen left by the paralegal. He did not look at me. He just pressed the ink to the page, preparing to sign away his kingdom. The cheap plastic pen moved across the thick parchment. The scratch of the ballpoint tip echoed in the quiet space. Winston endorsed the first page, He flipped to the next section and authorized the transfer of the primary holding shares. The patriarch did not look up. He kept his eyes fixed on the legal text. He was dismantling his own reign, letter by letter. Beatrice sat beside him. She did not weep for the fractured relationships or the betrayal she had endured. She cried because the social shield she spent her entire life polishing had just shattered. Her tears fell onto the glass surface near the diamond necklace. The vintage jewelry rested there, serving as a cold reminder of the royal status she had permanently forfeited. Julian stared at the documents confirming his plea arrangement. The terms were brutal and unyielding. To avoid a lengthy sentence in a federal penitentiary, he agreed to stringent conditions. He accepted 5 years of monitored probation. He agreed to pay profound financial restitution covering the corporate damages. Furthermore, the federal mandate permanently barred him from holding any corporate finance position or accessing commercial investment accounts. He was required to surrender his passport and submit to random quarterly audits. The Golden Boy was legally stripped of his wings. He would never again launch a startup or pitch a venture to wealthy investors. He was reduced to a common debtor, forced to rebuild his life from the ground up, without the safety net of the family name. Once the final signature dried, Evelyn collected the paperwork. She handed the stack to her senior paralegal waiting outside the door. The legal machinery engaged instantly. I did not wait for the ink to fade. I executed the corporate takeover while they were still sitting in the room. I opened my laptop and logged into the primary administrative portal of the Delaware Holding Enterprise. The security credentials now belonged exclusively to me. My first official act as the sole shareholder was a systematic liquidation. I targeted the shell companies Julian had used to funnel cash into his offshore gambling habits. I dissolved the corporate entities with a series of precise keystrokes, severing the illicit supply lines. Next, I accessed the estate discretionary accounts. These were the endless wells of cash Winston and Beatrice used to fund their country club memberships and their imported vehicles. I severed the routing numbers. I revoked their authorized user status. I canceled the premium corporate credit cards linked to their names. The financial exile was instantaneous. The family that threatened to banish me if I refused to pay $50,000 was now legally banished from my empire. They were locked out of the vault. The transition extended far beyond the digital ledgers. The residential estate where I had endured the dinner table extortion was a corporate asset. It belonged to the holding company. I instructed Evelyn to issue a formal 30-day eviction notice. Winston and Beatrice possessed no private savings to maintain a luxury residence. Their personal accounts had been drained years ago to hide Julian's initial failures. They were forced to secure a modest 2-bedroom condominium on the outskirts of the city. The relocation destroyed their social standing. The elite circles of Wilmington operate on a currency of perceived invulnerability. When the moving trucks arrived at the estate to carry away their downsized belongings, the country club whispers began. The prestigious board seats Winston held were quietly revoked. The charity committees Beatrice chaired asked her to step down. Their influence evaporated, leaving them isolated in their new, constrained reality. I sat at the glass table and watched them process the magnitude of their surrender. They had nothing left to say. I closed my laptop. I reached across the table and picked up the grandmother's diamond choker. The platinum links felt cool against my skin. I did not put it on. I placed the jewelry inside a protective velvet pouch. I gathered the finalized settlement contracts and the true trust ledgers. I stacked the documents neatly. I slid the papers and the velvet pouch into my leather briefcase. I closed the top flap. I pressed my thumbs against the brass latches. The sharp click of the brass locks echoed in the silent room. That distinct metallic sound was the final punctuation mark on 32 years of subjugation. I stood up from the table. I smoothed the front of my tailored suit jacket. I did not offer a parting speech. I did not gloat or demand an apology. Emotional outbursts belong to people who still need validation from their abusers. I required nothing from them. My victory was silent, rooted in ink and factual boundaries. I picked up my briefcase by the sturdy handle. I walked toward the exit. Evelyn opened the heavy glass door for me. I I stepped out of the conference room and walked down the carpeted hallway without casting a single backward glance. The elevator ride down to the street level was incredibly quiet. I watched the digital floor numbers count backward: 40th floor, 30th floor, 20th floor. With every descending level, a layer of historical weight lifted from my shoulders. The systemic deceit, the forced obedience, the constant vigilance remained trapped in the glass room above me. The elevator chimed and the steel doors parted. I stepped into the sprawling marble lobby of the legal building. The space was bustling with attorneys and corporate clients. None of them knew the monumental shift that had just occurred. To the rest of the world, it was a standard Tuesday morning. To me, it was the first day of true autonomy. I walked through the revolving doors and onto the busy sidewalk. The winter sun shone brightly, reflecting off the tall glass structures of the financial district. I took a deep breath of the cold, crisp air. The physical world felt different. It felt expansive. For my entire adult life, my vision had been narrowed by the demands of the Delaware dynasty. I structured my career to protect myself from their extraction. I audited companies to sharpen the skills I needed to survive my own relatives. Now the enemy was neutralized. The defensive posture I maintained for decades was no longer necessary. I held the controlling shares of a massive real estate portfolio. I possessed the freedom to redesign my professional and personal landscape. I walked toward my parked car, thinking about the dinner table. It felt like a lifetime had passed since Winston tapped his champagne flute. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about loyalty. He believed he was cementing his authority. He never imagined his extortion attempt would serve as the catalyst for his own destruction. They pushed me into a corner, assuming I would surrender my resources to purchase their conditional love. They failed to realize that pushing an auditor into a corner only forces them to examine the structural integrity of the walls. I found the hidden cracks. I found the forged signatures and the secret bloodlines. I dismantled the foundation, leaving them with nothing but the consequences of their own greed. I unlocked my vehicle and placed the leather briefcase on the passenger seat. The brass locks gleamed in the sunlight. I started the engine and merged into the morning traffic. The city of Wilmington retreated in my rear-view mirror. I did not intend to return to my apartment right away. The corporate transition required a new setting, a place far removed from the suffocating memories of the estate. The holding company owned several premium properties across the state. One specific asset, located on the coast, had always caught my attention during my review of the ledgers. It was time to claim my territory. The war was officially over, and the era of profound peace was about to begin. 6 months passed. The transition from winter to early summer brought a warm coastal breeze sweeping off the Atlantic. I stood on the expansive wooden deck of my beachfront property in Rehoboth. This house was a hidden asset I retained during the corporate restructuring of the Delaware holding enterprise. Winston had purchased the property years ago, intending to use it as a private retreat for his wealthy associates. He rarely visited. When I took ownership, I stripped away the heavy velvet curtains and the dark antique furniture he preferred. I painted the walls a crisp white. I opened the floor-to-ceiling glass doors, allowing the salt air to circulate through the open living spaces. The house no longer felt like a corporate asset. It felt like a sanctuary. I rested my hands on the smooth cedar railing. The midday sun warmed my skin. Below the deck, the ocean waves crashed against the shoreline in a rhythmic, continuous loop. The sound of the water was immense and grounding. It washed out the distant noise of the boardwalk and the calling seagulls. I closed my eyes and listened to the tide. For 32 years, my nervous system had operated on a high wire. I was always anticipating the next demand, the next subtle insult, the next financial crisis I would be forced to solve. I lived waiting for my phone to buzz with an emergency. Standing in the sun, I realized the underlying tension in my shoulders was gone. The defensive armor I wore for decades had dissolved. The sliding glass door behind me opened. Footsteps tapped softly against the wooden deck boards. I turned around and smiled. Aunt Valerie walked out holding 2 crystal wine glasses and a chilled bottle of Sauvignon Blanc. She wore a breezy linen sundress and woven leather sandals. The formidable defensive posture she used to maintain around the family was absent. She looked radiant and relaxed. She set the glasses on a small teak patio table and poured the pale golden wine. "I thought we should celebrate," she said, handing me a glass. "The settlement finalized this morning. The fiduciary board formally closed the remaining ledgers. The transition is officially over." I took the glass. The condensation chilled my fingertips. I raised the crystal toward the ocean, proposing a silent toast to the end of an era. We took a sip. The wine was crisp and bright, carrying distinct notes of citrus and sea salt. It was the taste of autonomy. Valerie leaned against the railing beside me. She looked out at the horizon. Her expression held a mixture of deep satisfaction and quiet reflection. She had watched her brother construct a dynasty built on deceit. She had watched him ruin lives to protect his ego. Now she was witnessing the aftermath. "I saw your mother yesterday," Valerie mentioned. Her voice was casual, devoid of the urgent tension that used to accompany any update regarding the estate. I kept my eyes on the water. I did not tense up. "How are they adapting to the condominium?" "They are suffocating," Valerie replied, taking another sip of her wine. Beatrice goes to the local supermarket wearing her old designer evening coats and full makeup. She parades down the produce aisles, acting as though she is attending a charity gala. She demands the store managers fetch her specific imported items they do not carry. She is obsessed with maintaining the illusion of immense wealth to strangers who do not know or care who she is. She treats the cashiers like her personal staff. It is tragic, really. She is performing a play, but the theater is empty. "And Winston?" I asked. Valerie let out a soft breath. Winston sits in his small living room, staring at the television. He tried to join a local golf league last month. The organizers recognized his name from the federal fraud indictments and the civil lawsuits. They politely declined his application, citing character clauses in their bylaws. He has no board meetings to run. He has no employees to terrorize. He has no audience to intimidate. He is shrinking, Bridget. The man who thought he ruled the world cannot even get a tea time on a public course. I absorbed the update. A year ago, the thought of my parents living in public disgrace would have filled me with a complex mixture of guilt and anxiety. They programmed me to absorb their shame. But standing on the sunlit deck, I searched my chest for any lingering trace of obligation. I found nothing. I did not pity them. I did not revel in their misery. I simply recognized the natural consequences of their own arrogance. They built a cage for me, but they ended up locking themselves inside. Valerie turned toward me, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "But the most poetic development involves Julian," she said. Her tone carried a distinct edge of amusement. I took another sip of the crisp wine. I assume the federal judge restricted his travel. "He restricted everything," Valerie confirmed. "Julian cannot leave the state. He cannot open a line of credit. He faces a staggering monthly restitution payment to satisfy the terms of his plea agreement. Since he is permanently barred from the corporate finance sector and possesses zero actual skills, he had to find entry-level employment. He applied to dozens of places. Most ignored him due to the felony conviction. He finally secured a job last week. Where, I asked. He is working as a barista at the premium coffee roastery in the downtown financial district, Valerie said. The exact coffee shop located on the ground floor of your old consulting firm. I lowered my wine glass. The irony was profound. The golden boy who used to mock the working class. The heir who demanded $50,000 for luxury soccer tickets. He was now wearing a green apron, standing behind a counter. He has to clock in at 5 in the morning, Valerie continued. He spends his days steaming milk and wiping down countertops. He is forced to serve espresso to the very corporate executives he used to drink with at the country club. The partners from your firm walk in every morning. They recognize him. They hand him their credit cards and wait for him to call out their drink orders. He has to smile and thank them for their business. He is serving the elite he thought he belonged to. A quiet laugh escaped my lips. It was not a bitter sound. It was the sound of a perfectly balanced ledger. Julian tried to extort my career to fund his fantasy. Now my former colleagues were funding his legal restitution, one cup of coffee at a time. The universe possesses a remarkable sense of symmetry when you stop trying to protect toxic people from the fallout of their own choices. I looked down at my phone resting on the teak table. The screen was dark and silent. It had been over 6 months since the night of the 200 missed calls. I remembered sitting in my dark apartment listening to the endless stream of voicemails. I remembered Beatrice crying and Winston threatening my future. For a long time, I kept those audio files saved on a secure server. I thought I needed to keep the evidence, to remind myself why I fought them. I thought I needed the recordings to fuel my resolve. But as the ocean breeze brushed against my face, I realized I did not need the audio files anymore. I did not need to carry the evidence of their cruelty to validate my peace. The anger that fueled my initial strike had burned away, leaving a profound and unshakable indifference. I picked up the phone. I opened the encrypted folder containing the archived voicemails. Without a second thought, I selected the entire batch. I pressed the delete icon. A prompt appeared asking me to confirm the permanent erasure of the data. I tapped confirm. The files vanished. The heavy digital anchor holding me to that freezing winter night was gone. True revenge was never about destroying my family. Destroying them was merely a byproduct of reclaiming my stolen property. True revenge was about becoming untouchable. It was about reaching a state of mind where their opinions, their demands, and their existence no longer influenced my reality. They were characters from a story I finished reading a long time ago. Valerie watched me set the phone back down. She raised her glass. To the future, she proposed. I clinked my crystal against hers. The delicate ringing sound merged with the crashing of the tide. To the future, I echoed. We stood side by side, leaning against the cedar railing. The gentle sound of the ocean waves rolled over the shore, masking the silence of my phone. It had not rung with a family demand in over 6 months. The Delaware dynasty was a fading memory, replaced by the vast, open horizon of the Atlantic. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh coastal air. I looked out over the sparkling water, savoring the quiet, undeniable peace. The ledger was closed. The debts were settled. My life, my wealth, and my future belonged entirely to me. There is a distinct, almost sacred mythology surrounding the traditional American family. We are raised to believe that the home is our ultimate sanctuary, a fortress constructed from unconditional love, mutual respect, and unwavering support. We are taught that the mahogany dining tables, the holiday gatherings, and the shared traditions are the physical manifestations of a safety net that will catch us whenever we fall. Yet, as Bridget's harrowing journey reveals, the polished veneer of dynastic wealth and curated social perfection can often conceal a terrifying reality. Sometimes the fortress is actually a prison, and the people entrusted with our care view us not as children to be nurtured, but as ledgers to be balanced and assets to be drained. Parenting in its truest and most honorable form is an act of selfless stewardship. It is the profound responsibility of guiding a fragile life into independent adulthood, equipping a child with the moral and emotional tools necessary to navigate the world. Winston and Beatrice represent the darkest inversion of these traditional values. They replaced stewardship with ownership. In their minds, family responsibility was not about protecting their offspring. It was a strict corporate hierarchy where loyalty was demanded as a currency and obedience was the only acceptable tax. They operated their household like a cartel, utilizing the language of love and duty to enforce a ruthless extraction of resources. When a parent views a child's success solely as a dividend to be harvested, the fundamental contract of family is irrevocably shattered. The bedrock of any healthy family structure relies entirely on honesty. Without it, the ground beneath a child's feet is nothing more than a sinkhole waiting to collapse. The revelation of Julian's true parentage serves as a chilling testament to the destructive power of generational deceit. Winston and Beatrice chose to bury a scandal to protect the patriarch's towering ego and immaculate social standing. To maintain this lie, they forced everyone around them to participate in a silent, suffocating play. The deceit infected every interaction, turning a mother's gaze into a weapon of suppressed resentment and elevating an illegitimate son to the status of an untouchable golden boy. When parents prioritize their public image over the truth, they forfeit their right to lead. They teach their children that reality is malleable, that deception is an acceptable tool for survival, and that trust is a liability. In tandem with honesty, fairness is the quiet engine that keeps the family dynamic moving forward. Fairness is not always about the equal distribution of financial wealth, but it is unequivocally about equal emotional dignity. American culture champions the ideals of merit, hard work, and individual autonomy. Yet Bridget was relegated to the role of the utility child. She was expected to endure grueling academic pressures and forge a demanding career, only to have her hard-earned stability siphoned away to fund the lavish, reckless lifestyle of the favored heir. Favoritism is a slow-acting poison. It breeds a quiet, devastating isolation in the neglected child, who eventually realizes that no amount of achievement will ever earn them a seat at the head of the table. True family responsibility requires parents to recognize and validate the unique worth of every child, refusing to sacrifice one sibling's future to subsidize another's fantasy. This profound lack of fairness stems directly from a void of emotional awareness. Emotional awareness in parenting means recognizing a child as a separate, autonomous entity with their own inherent rights, boundaries, and internal landscapes. Beatrice performed the role of a mother with theatrical precision, summoning tears and maternal outrage on command, but she possessed zero genuine empathy for the daughter she was bleeding dry. Winston commanded respect through authoritarian fear, mistaking his own booming voice for true leadership. They never once paused to consider the emotional toll of their extortion. They never saw the trembling hands or the quiet despair. They only saw the obstacles standing between them and their desired payout. Fostering emotional awareness breaks the cycle of trauma. It requires parents to listen without calculating, to guide without dictating, and to offer comfort without attaching an invoice. Long-term guidance, the final pillar of raising a child, is not about controlling their trajectory until they break under the pressure. It is about empowering them to build a life that belongs entirely to them. The tragedy of the Taylor dynasty is that the only genuine guidance Bridget ever received came in the form of a hushed warning on a summer porch. Never let them see your ledger. That single piece of wisdom from her grandmother was a life raft in a sea of exploitation. It taught Bridget the necessity of boundaries. It is a harsh truth, but sometimes the most valuable lesson a child can learn is how to protect themselves from the very people who share their last name. Authentic long-term guidance prepares a child to stand on their own 2 feet, confident and unburdened, rather than shackling them to the endless debts of their ancestors. Bridget's eventual victory was not found in the destruction of her family's empire, but in the reclamation of her own autonomy. She achieved the ultimate American ideal, true independence. She walked away from the heavy mahogany table and stepped into the sunlight of her own life, leaving the architects of her pain to sit alone in the ruins of their deceit. If this journey resonated with the quiet, unspoken truths of your own history, or if you have ever felt the crushing weight of an invisible invoice slid across the dinner table under the guise of familial duty, you are not alone. I invite you to join our growing community of listeners who find strength in the truth. Follow the channel Edana Told Stories, where we will continue to explore the complex, sometimes painful, but ultimately liberating narratives of family survival and the pursuit of genuine peace. As you step away from this story, take a moment to reflect on the structures that govern your own life. The next time you sit down at a crowded family gathering, listen to the clink of the silverware and the rhythm of the conversations echoing around the room. Look closely at the faces of the people passing the plates. Is the warmth in the room freely given, rooted in a foundation of honest, unconditioned love? Or is there an invisible ledger resting beneath the table, quietly tallying the cost of your seat? The answer may change the way you view your reflection in the glass, and it might just be the key to unlocking the door you never realized was closed.